Today, this panel is going to talk about the 2014 State of Hispanic Journalists Report. The survey itself is going to talk about Hispanic journalists, their beliefs about tech careers, media, and overall social media. The survey was conducted by the California State University of Fullerton, Hispanic Wire, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and Florida International University. I have the honor of introducing a wonderful panel. To my left, we have Dr. Dean Casolea, Director of Maxwell Center for International Communications at Cal State University Fullerton. To his left, we have Inez Gonzalez, who's the Director of California State University Fullerton. To her left, Mr. Hugo Alta, President of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. And to his left, we have El Mero Mero de Hispanicize, Manny Ruiz. Is your mic working? Good. And to Manny's left, we have Raul Reyes, Dean Professor, School of Journalism at Mass Communication at Florida International University. So I'm just going to kick it off to Inez so we can start talking about the findings and get the conversation going. Bless you. Is it not working? No. Maybe. Yeah. No problem. I have a loud voice. What? So, first of all, I want to start with acknowledgement. I want to thank Manny because it was really Manny's idea to do this survey. So I definitely want to thank him for agreeing to partner with Cal State Fullerton. You might not know that we graduate the most Latinos in communications in the nation, and that's why my program, the Latino Communications Initiative, was created in October. We're really pleased to partner with FIU, who has been a collaborator of Hispanicize. But for our school, this partnership is huge because we were able to bring in 4 students. There's some students here, a shout out to them, and they've been great. They're interning with Hispanicize, getting great, relevant experience. Manny's working them to death, and they're loving it. And then I want to acknowledge the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, because from the beginning I thought, if we're going to do a survey on Latino journalists, I want Hugo Balta and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists to be involved. So thank you, Hugo, for being part of this. I'm going to give special thanks to my colleague, Dean Casolea, because really without him, he's the statistician. I would not be able to do this survey in an academic level. So thank you very much for your efforts. I'm going to pass it on to him. He's going to present the numbers and then pass it back to me with some commentary on the open-ended comments that provided great insight.
All right, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I'm actually maybe going to come down here and I'll present from in front of the podium here. Again, what I'm going to be doing today is, I guess our game plan is that I'm going to just present the highlights. We're not going to go into a great amount of detail with the data. I'm going to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel of experts here to discuss, a little bit more about the data and what the data mean, especially for the future. I'm going to go ahead and if I can have that, all I need is this. Fantastic. I should do this. So if you're not familiar with the project, and Inez was right, this was a true collaborative effort. Sometimes people say that. It was. Again, Manny, thank you. This was actually Manny's idea, and it was a very good idea. But the purpose was to survey Latino journalists to get their perceptions of the climate of their industry, their perceptions about optimism in their careers, what tools they used, what tools they'd like to use more, and what were some of the biggest trends that will be affecting Latino journalism in the next 5 years. You've heard that we did the survey. I'll give you a little quick background of what we did. Basically, we used a 31-item internet-based survey. We used SurveyMonkey. We actually drew the list of Latino journalists that were invited to participate from the database from NAHJ, and also the media database list from Hispanicize. Participants basically were given a link they could click on, given 3 weeks to complete the survey, and in the end, we had a fairly healthy response rate. We had 294 respondents that actually completed surveys that were Latino journalists residing in the United States. And I'm very careful to say that. And we, of course, did have more surveys. But, for example, some people said they weren't Latino journalists, and others were from outside the U.S. But we wanted to be very specific. We wanted this to be a study of the Latino journalist in the U.S. 294. Now, what's interesting, if you look here, is we were very surprised by the depth of the sample pool. For example, 71% of the participants decided to complete the survey in English. We had 29% that decided to complete the survey in Spanish. We had an even balance of males and females. Our average age was about 35 to 50. The big surprise, though, is the type of journalism that these journalists were practicing. We didn't expect to find that basically almost 56% were practicing online journalism, and then another 22% or 23% had blogs. So what we're saying is that we had a very, very broad national sample that represented a wide range of years of experience, gender, age, and then type of journalism. The best way to describe what we found is to use the word guarded optimism. The data were mixed. They were mixed in the sense that there was some optimism and there was some pessimism. We found an even split among the journalists who said that, I'm optimistic for the future. Some said, things really haven't changed for me in the past few years. And others said, I'm still concerned about my job. So when we first got the first snapshot of the data of their perceptions of the climate, what we found was that, again, there were mixed feelings. What we did to make this a little bit easier to understand is we put the climate question, when we asked the journalists to rate the climate, their optimism, on a 100-point scale. And you will see that the total, basically, in the upper right, was 62 out of 100. But the interesting finding was, among those that produced content in Spanish, it was lower. And that was going to be a theme that will be addressed on the panel throughout the survey. There was more pessimism among those journalists, for example, that produced content in Spanish as opposed to English, or among those that were producing bilingual content. Additionally, we found a couple of other interesting findings. For example, 35% said that in the past year that there was downsizing. But on the flip side, 59% said that their organization had adapted and was ready to basically now compete in the new technological marketplace. The idea is that there was there was some pessimism, but there was also optimism, and the optimism was looking at technology. Last question on this slide that I'll address, we asked the journalists, basically, do you believe that the economic problems that have hit the industry, have they been harder on Latino journalists, or did they affect everybody in general? Basically, what we found is only about 39% said it affected Latino journalists. Most, as you can see from the slide, said the economic problems have impacted everybody, regardless of their ethnicity. In terms of the tools, we wanted to find out what tools were they using. And what you can see from the slide, and by the way, this study will be available on Hispanicize on the website. You'll be able to download it whenever that link will be ready. Will it be ready today or this week?
Yeah, today on Hispanicize Wire.
On Hispanicize Wire. It will be ready. What we found is this: we asked a couple of questions. The first was, are traditional press releases still an important tool? 39% said yes. But more importantly, when we asked, are multimedia materials with press releases important? We had basically over 70%, almost 80% said that they were. In terms of, we asked about trends for publishing news or gathering information from stories, which social media channels you're using or what media channels you're using. The choice was clear. As you can see, it was Twitter and Facebook. There was one key difference that we do want to point out here. When we looked again at the data, there was a trend. And the trend showed that while everyone said that multimedia materials with press releases were important, those producing Spanish content said they were much more important than, for example, those that responded, those who produced English content. So one of the key findings again now is we find it flipped, that those journalists who produce Spanish language content really had a preference for more video, for more images than those who produce, for example, in English. So I talked about this optimism, and this slide will explain what we found in this data and why we think that these journalists see a better future. The word I'd like to use is entrepreneurism. We asked some questions about entrepreneurism, about if the journalists, for example, had an online presence. We found, first of all, that many did blog. 41% blogged, and a good number said that those blogs were successful. More importantly, however, we asked a question that said, if it were economically viable, would you be likely to actually start your own digital content platform? And as you can see, 54% said that they would, and that was also reflected in the comments. Another surprise in the study is on the upper right of this slide. We asked the journalists who participated, what impact is the explosion of online and social media having on your careers? Amazingly, 58% said it's having a positive impact. So again, what we're seeing is that there is still concern. I don't think that any journalist has forgotten the economic impact of what happened in the past 5 years, past 10 years with the downsizing in the media. But they see an opportunity, especially one for entrepreneurism, in this new digital future. Last but not least, again, to stress, 59% actually said that their organization is now ready and technologically adapt to be able to compete. Now moving on to what they felt they needed to be able to do this. We asked a couple of questions about what types of skills would you like training in? And basically the theme, of course, is technology. That's what they want. When we asked the journalists what was the one social media platform that you would like more training in, you can see Twitter was number one, followed by blogs and LinkedIn. Those were the top choices. So again, the journalists in this survey are starting to embrace the digital future, and they want more training. Now, we also asked some questions about skills, some very specific skills that they would like to be trained in. And as you can see by the graph at the bottom of this slide, they want training in two different areas. Yes, they want training, for example, on how to do things like produce video or better digital images. But more importantly, they want the tools to be able to build and manage their own platforms. As you can see, the number one choice here was information on how to build websites. And number two, very close, was between building and managing blogs and capturing and editing video. Again, what we saw was basically this desire to be entrepreneurial and to have the tools and the access to be able to build their own digital content platforms. Now last, and I'm going to turn this over to the experts on the panel. We finished the survey by asking an open-ended question, and we asked them if there was one top issue, that was going to impact the future of Latino journalists in the next 5 years, what would it be? And as you can see, the overwhelming response was technology. Basically, what the comments said was that they saw that the shifts in technology had an impact, and they would continue to make an impact. More importantly, what they said is that the Latino journalist is going to have to adapt, that they need skills and they need training. The other themes that popped out, they talked about the demographic shifts. That they said that there's going to be a further expansion of the Latino population in the U.S. and an increase in things like bilingualism. We also saw comments, for example, that economics would affect it. I think, again, I don't know many journalists who have forgotten what's happened in the industry in the last 10 years, and some of them are still worried. And last but not least, changes in politics and policy, and the common theme there was basically talking about things like immigration and immigration reform. So again, I'm going to now turn this over to the panel, but the theme was that there was some optimism, a little bit of pessimism, but it's guarded optimism. And I think many of the journalists that completed this survey are seeing a bright future in entrepreneurism and a digital future. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Inez to talk a little bit more about the comments about what this data means and the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Dean. So the reason that Cal State Fullerton was interested in doing this survey, not only to collect data, but also to identify if there were educational training needs, and for us to be able to make adjustments in our College of Communications on how we should train the students. And so we thought this was very insightful, especially the open-ended items, because that was the opportunity for the journalists to tell us what they thought were the biggest challenges. And as Dean said, technology. No doubt that presents the most opportunities, but also the most challenges. Journalists now are asked to create publish, edit, shoot, everything. And so they're expected to do more with less resources, and they are asking for more training. And the Spanish media journalists felt that social media had negatively impacted their careers more. This was very interesting and a high significant of difference on where there are opportunities for social media, and the journalists saw that. Spanish media journalists identified that as a big challenge. And so for Cal State Fullerton, we're thinking perhaps we need to provide training in Spanish for this population. So that was a great insight for us on technology. The economy, so the media consolidation was definitely something that came up. And again, Spanish media journalists thought that they had seen more cuts that impacted them. In regards to demographic shift, I thought that was specifically insightful on the language. You know, the question about where is Spanish going in the US, bilingual, English, and the frustration that really media outlets are experimenting and segregating the Latino audience, and does that work? And so for language, for me at least, what was clear was if you're going to produce in Spanish, having the ability to produce in both languages will be an asset, because the trend that we saw here was those that are producing exclusively in Spanish have been challenged, and they see that. But if you are able to produce in both languages, you'll have an edge. And so that is the message that Cal State Fullerton is sharing with the students. And in fact, we're going to be offering communication-related courses in Spanish, because you all know it's not enough just to be able to communicate with family and friends. If you're going to be publishing in Spanish, you should have correct grammar, and it should be correct Spanish. And there were concerns in the comments about what is happening to the Spanish language in the United States. Is it disappearing? So as far as a university is concerned, this was very enlightening. I also want to point out regarding politics and policy, immigration was certainly something that came up often, but also the lack of respect, and that came often several times. People said it was just respeto. I mean, there wasn't a lot of analysis on this, and I was sharing this with a journalist, and she was nodding her head. So there's an issue here of whether Latino journalists are being respected in the industry. And in that sense, diversity is also a theme that came up, and the lack of diversity in top management. And I worked at the National Hispanic Media Coalition for many years. We're very aware of this. And so this is the reason that I think this team is very important, because we don't just want to talk today about the data that we collected. I hope that today we can identify whether there are actions, specific actions that we can take to address these challenges and opportunities. So I'll pass it on to, who am I passing it on to?
Okay, great. Buenos dias. NHJ is very proud and honored to be part of this study in partnership with Hispanicize, and certainly with Cal State and FIU. It's a very important study, and I think for me, in looking at the data, it reinforces what a lot of us know. We're very cautiously optimistic, and we look to the future with, a little bit of fear, but also excitement. And we're also catching up. When you talk about the digital space, you look at the last 5 years, the tools that journalists are using in news gathering and also in providing that content, news, information, and entertainment to the community continuously changes, it evolves. And so just when you think you figured it out, well, guess what? We're making changes in it, or something new starts. So I think part of what we've seen as far as that concern is, and wanting more training, is that it continuously changes. But I also think that for journalists specifically, we all use social media, and I know if I start, looking up even the folks around this room, if a lot of what you're using social media for is share with your circle last night's reception, or maybe perhaps you went to South Beach for dinner or a couple of drinks, then you're not utilizing it smartly. But what I see from the study is that need of understanding that I can use social media not just to distribute the content that I'm producing, but also in news gathering. And that's a double-edged sword, because a lot of times we've seen that in the circus that sometimes it is, especially in a breaking news situation, when a lot of information is being filtered out there. You know, I was joking with a friend of mine that in LA they had a couple of earthquakes, and it was funny to see that there was an earthquake and then everybody was putting it on Facebook and tweeting about it. I'm like, really? Shouldn't you be more concerned about making sure that everything is fine with your house and structure and all that? But this is the age that we live in. So it's very important to continuously learn, hone your skills in that plane. But as one of my colleagues told me, this isn't anything new in regards to the content. At the end of the day, it's about telling stories, and telling stories well. The tools will change throughout, have changed, and will continue to change as we move forward. But at the heart of what journalists do, it's about telling stories, and telling stories fair and accurately. And success, really, especially in the digital space, is focus. If you want to be successful, you need to take it from up here and take it to the hyper-local level to specifically speak to a particular audience. And even walking around Hispanicize and meeting a lot of the different panelists in different sessions, a lot of their success is again attributed to being pinpoint focused. Bloggers that are Latino parents and their experience, and sharing that experience, and it being, again, universal, not just to Latinos, of course, but also to other male parents, so much so that Disney, a parent company of where I work in ESPN, very family-oriented, purchased the company. So if you want to be successful in this space, it's really to first understand what your experiences are and the value of that experience based on your gender, based on your age, based on what part of the country you live in, because of course we know that a Latino in the East Coast is very different than a Latino in the West Coast. And we understand those sensibilities much better than the larger American companies, where even the U.S. Census put us into a nice little bucket. You know, we're 50+ million Latinos in this country. Well, we don't self-identify as Latinos. We self-identify from the country of origin where we're from, or our families. That type of sensibility is very important as these media companies and companies in general look to do better attract the Latino audience and better serve them. But you have those sensibilities. And then we talked about how Latinos communicate in English. There's English-dominant Latinos, most of them first, second, third generation. There's Spanish-dominant Latinos, obviously driven by foreign-born Latinos. And then there's this third market of bilingual, bicultural Latinos that live in both spaces, and understanding that I go to Univision, Telemundo, Mundo Fox for certain content, and I'm going to Fusion, I'm going to ABC, NBC for other content. Understanding those differences will make you successful in whatever work you're doing for your current employer, or if you're independent entrepreneurial.
Let me give it to Dean.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism, Mass Communication at FIU. Thank you, Manny. Thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this panel and this study. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you know, FIU is very committed to training and participating in this type of study, but also training, providing the skills that people need to succeed. And one of the things that jumped at me as I was going through the results of the survey was a certain discrepancy in the level of satisfaction, of optimism between this Latino journalist who was writing mostly in Spanish and the ones who are working in English. It's even kind of a 12%, I think, range, the difference between those two groups. And one of the things that we hear the most is the rise, the emergence of Spanish language media, how important Spanish language media becoming as an alternative, as one more opportunity for Latino journalists to be working on. And that, I didn't see that reflected in the data necessarily, and that surprised me, because if the Latino journalists operating in Spanish are less optimistic, much less optimistic than the ones working in English, what does that tell you about the status of Latino media? So it was one of the concerns that I had. The other one is I was very pleased with the optimism, I think the guarded optimism, the fact that people are looking at entrepreneurialism as one of the ways, starting their own businesses, their own websites, their own blogs, as one of the ways to succeed. I think that's a really smart move, because especially if you look at the other part of the data, more than half of the people we interviewed believe that the organizations they work for are not very sound financially. So you can see that people are thinking about their next move, and I think getting the skills that you need to succeed as an entrepreneur, as somebody who can set up your own media company. We are telling the students, when you get out of here, you cannot think traditional media anymore in the sense that people did 10 years ago. You have to create your own job. You have to create your own opportunities. Maybe the job that you're going to create in 5 years doesn't even exist right now as a position, but you have to prove to people not only that you have the skills to start in this profession, but also that you have something else, you have something extra that those of can do, that Miami can do attitude. People come from all over Latin America here, I think with that spirit, that you come here to succeed and you come here to do things that perhaps you couldn't do in your country of origin. And this spirit, this entrepreneurial spirit, gives me a lot of optimism. Just this past semester, to work on what Inez was talking about in terms of Fullerton on the West Coast. Here on the East Coast in Florida, FIU has been recognizing this need for training. Just this past semester, we've had a series of digital workshops. We are mainly reaching our students and alumni, people who graduated 5, 10 years ago, and saying, look, we can train you on the new skills, the multimedia skills. But now we are going to try to partner with associations such as NAHJ and Hispanicize to reach more Latino journalists, specifically Latino journalists, in terms of giving the skills. One of the things that we hear the most was also reflected in the survey. We hear the most from the students, from professionals, and from the organizations is that the level of written Spanish is much lower than the level of spoken Spanish, meaning, as Inez was saying and others, that journalists, Latino journalists can communicate in Spanish, but they can't necessarily write. They don't feel confident about the written level of the Spanish. And of course, institutions such as Univision and all the other Telemundo, they are reaching out to journalists in Latin America to cover that particular gap, because they don't feel like a lot of the local or the US-based Latino journalists have the skills developed. So one of the things that we are trying to do is have more classes. We have a master's degree completely 100% in Spanish. We were the first ones in the country to have a Spanish language master's in journalism. It's a very strong, very well recognized program, but also we are now trying to reach the undergraduate level and have more introductory classes in Spanish, so that we are telling students to be bilingual, to succeed. We can really give them the means. So I make a commitment as the dean of the school to increase the amount of classes that we have in Spanish, but also give back those skills that people who graduated 5, 10 years ago badly need to succeed in the market. Thank you.
So I have a very weird perspective here, and that is that I'm a former reporter. I used to be a police reporter way back in the early 90s. And when I left the Miami Herald, I was terrified of what my other options were because I didn't want to be a TV guy. I wanted to be Bob Woodward. I mean, I was very, if you knew my past, you'd be surprised. But I was very hardcore, journalist. And I got into public relations literally just as a transition to what I thought would be a law degree. And then it kind of sucked me in. Different things happened in life, and I ended up being in this. But I really was only able to relate to the part of PR that had to do with media relations because I just wanted to be with reporters all the time. I didn't want to work in traditional PR in that sense. So in 2000, I started a company, a wire service called Hispanic PR Wire. And by the way, Hispanicize Wire is the partner here, not Hispanicize the event. Hispanicize Wire, my baby, is the partner in this research, just to clarify. But, I had to become a media entrepreneur. I'm a very reluctant media entrepreneur. I'm going to tell you the truth. I never, if I had, the story is that if I had probably gotten paid $1 more an hour at Ketchum Public Relations, I would have stayed very happily, not ever looked at anything as an entrepreneur. But they kind of pushed me in another direction, and it led me into thinking about the world as an entrepreneur. And it was really interesting how that happened. But that'll be the topic of Thursday when we do the media we're doing a boot camp for media entrepreneurship at Hispanicize. It's gonna kick butt. So you got to be a part of that. But some insights that I can share is that in 2009, I don't think these results would have been the same. No. I think there would have been more pessimism. And I'll tell you why. In 2009 is when we started the Hispanic PR blog. And I remember a number of people said, dude, you're going to starve if you depend on a blog. Because there was no marketers. Marketers were not thinking of blogs, especially in the Latino side. Didn't even exist practically. They were not thinking of Latino blogs or bloggers as potential media vehicles for messages. But right now, we are in an age of content marketing. And I think the fact that brands, and you see them all here at Hispanicize, Procter & Gamble and Target, 3M, all of these brands have captured the understanding that because media is now so dispersed, it's so fractured, there's now you got to look even more specific at individuals with a good following and a great voice to do more niche marketing. It's more available than ever before because now we are all able to be empowered entrepreneurs. That was not the case when I started Hispanic PR Wire and later sold it and all these things that we've done. I mean, a lot of the things that we're doing here would not be possible. It would not have made sense for any of you to be here probably if you were not from your one specific industry just 3 or 4 years ago because there wouldn't have been that much connection. But what's uniting all of you here is actually very much what we're talking about here. Content marketing is sort of the underpinning of what's making, it's a guarded optimism. And I think it's guarded and not more optimistic because journalists are still not, we're not, I'm saying it because I wear both hats. I know because I was in the newsroom. We're not trained to think like entrepreneurs. We're trained to think like storytellers, coming up with story ideas. That's our entrepreneurship, is story ideas. And we're not trained to worry about the paycheck. We never had to. But now the rules have changed. I have good friends that are even in the audience, I won't mention any, that they've gotten great positions at one news outlet that's launched one thing, and the next thing you know, the news outlet changes their mind. They're out of a job. They're back to having to figure it out. And so it's guarded because I think once journalists understand how they can model, what are the business models that are viable, and by the way, that today are viable, that 3 years ago were not, then I think you're going to see, I predict that when we do this, God willing, a year from now, we're going to have more optimism, not less optimism. This is just my take. I don't want to hog up the microphone, so let's just continue, Frankie.
I have to, I think personally that the study that, was conducted today is really important. One, I have to agree with Manny because in the last 5 years, focus on Hispanic media has really, really changed. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Manny, this is what, the 5th year that Hispanicize?
This is our 5th anniversary, but it's our 4 years.
Por ahí, 4 o 5.
No, it's our 5th Hispanicize, but we started in 2010, so technically it's the 5th Hispanicize.
So there, in the last 5 years, trends have changed, and it's particularly for Latino journalists. So this highlights And you know the saying, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you come from. So you have to study and understand what it is that we're doing as Latino journalists. In 2010, when I created Falsos Latino, no major media company was actually focusing to Latinos in English. And ask me the same thing today, there's probably 5 or 6 outlets that are doing what we did in 2010. And unfortunately, some have failed. NBC Latino shut down, CNN Latino. And it's concerning to me because I feel that there is much progression and much growth in the Latino market, especially for Latino journalists, whether it's in the entrepreneurial sector or just in journalism overall. I think there's a lot of work to be done. So to see operations from major networks like that fail, that cater to us in our community, is still concerning. So the fact that Hispanicize is out there, the fact that the universities are paying particular attention to Latinos, the NAHJ in particular is focusing on what we do today, it's important. So I actually applaud the findings, and they're excellent. I want to get a dialogue going with you guys on the survey, so I'm going to open it up to the floor. Any questions you have, feel free to ask. We got about 30 minutes left, so let's make the best out of it. Are there any questions now for the panelists? I'll let you think about that one. No, everybody don't fight about the questions, please. I'm actually going to turn it to you guys. Name one big highlight from the survey you feel was impactful to you, that surprised you actually when you were conducting the survey. Just one big one for each of you.
Thank you. I guess for me is that I guess I was probably most surprised by some of the differences between the optimism and the trends that were seen by those Latino journalists who produce, for example, content in Spanish, and those that, for example, produced in English or bilingual. I honestly thought that those numbers wouldn't be as different as they were, but they're pretty large, 10, 12 points.
I was more interested in the language issue. So when I worked at the National Hispanic Media Coalition, we talked about how Univision and Telemundo want to say that the majority of Latinos speak Spanish in the U.S. And at NHMC, we would say that's not the case. The majority of Latinos, and especially the future generations, are speaking more English. And so now that I'm at Cal State Fullerton, and we have a large bilingual population, I came into Fullerton saying, I don't want Latino students to think that they have to work at Telemundo or Univision, right? I mean, I think people want to work where they want to work, and because you're a Latino, you don't have to go to Univision and Telemundo. And so when I realized that we had a large bilingual population, it was just very evident the bilingual opportunity, and the findings state that there's great opportunity for those that can produce content in both languages, because we are living in a more global world. So instead of Telemundo and Univision bringing in talent from Latin America because they seem to not find U.S. Latinos that are proficient in both languages, what about us getting the students to become proficient in both languages so that they can go to Latin America and work in both places? So I'm very excited about that. That is my focus. As I said, we're going to be offering more classes, communications classes in Spanish. This is very exciting for us and just confirms what our program is going to be doing at Cal State Fullerton.
No, I agree. I think that for me, it's also about language, and we talked about it several times already, but I think it's the proficiency in Spanish. And it's not, just students, and it's great to see that the schools are focusing particularly in Spanish and in assisting them in understanding that it'll make you more marketable in this space if you have the true proficiency in Spanish and in English to communicate, to news gather. And that's one thing. A lot of times I come across not just students but professionals who say fluent in Spanish, proficient in Spanish and English. And then when I start to talk to them in Spanish, and then when I ask them to write in Spanish, then the level of proficiency changes. The Spanish we learn at home, that we speak at home, is not the Spanish that is the written word in journalism, and certainly if you're in broadcasting and how you speak it. So that's very important. I was at UNT, the University of North Texas, last week, and one of the things that really struck me, and it speaks to the schools of higher learning and understanding this very importance, is that part of their program, part of the newscast that they're producing is in Spanish, and they have students that gravitate from one to the other, and that's very important. It's important to understand that there's no one size fits all, and really, as we will continue to do more studies, again, it goes back to success. It goes to being very hyperly local focused on the content. And I'm sure, as studies have found, the interests of Spanish-dominant Latinos, while there'll be similarities across the board because we're all impacted by our environment. So if you're living in South Florida, weather affects everyone. This is the gateway to Latin America, so a lot of things that happen, especially 90 miles to, south of Key West, affects this community. So it's important to understand that there are things that we all similarly have, but that language does drive also our interests. And so what they're going for, or Spanish dominant or bilinguals, biculturals, to the Telemundos and Univisions of the world will be very different in what their interests are to the folks that are sticking mainly to English dominant media. But I think you're right. I think when I look at my career, and I'm 44 years young, but when I talk to students who are 24, wherever you are, you need to look at a self-assessment of where you are, what tools you need, and what you need to improve. And part of that should be language, because if you have to imagine you're one of 1,000 candidates who are going for whether it's a traditional job or in the entrepreneurial space, and you're looking for points of differentiation, and language might be that point of differentiation that makes you successful in reaching that audience and being effective in producing content that resonates with them.
Well, I think one of the things that's going to dramatically, remember that they're talking about this today. I think, first of all, I'm publishing a book this summer called Journalist's Guide to Media Entrepreneurship. And obviously, I've sold a company for a couple $1 million a couple years ago, and I've been able to do this again, thank God, and it's not, I don't take all the glory. I have many great partners, and I thank God for real on this. But I want you to know that I think one of the things that's dramatically going to change is that every journalism school is going to continue to transform itself more and more like a business school. I think journalists are going to have to, and it's going to be difficult because that is a tension. There's a church and state, I remember when it used to be even church and state as a print reporter between me and the photography department. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember. I'm 44 too. But I remember when I would go to an assignment, I used to love to have all the stories. I used to want to have a story and photographs. I love to see my name everywhere at that time. Believe it or not, I don't as much anymore. But I remember that they would say, nope, don't lift the camera. It doesn't matter if I was able to take the photograph of the person I was interviewing and I knew what I was doing. It was church and state. Well, that barrier's already crossed. And then the barrier to video, that barrier's already blown through. And now I think the final frontier is journalists are going to have to be more mindful of the business of their company. I already see it, by the way. I'm not going to mention names here, but obviously through Hispanicized Wire and everything that we do, we work with a lot of newsrooms across the country. And I see even in hardcore news organizations that would never have talked like that, and I talk to a lot of companies, I could tell you that a lot of news organizations are even the reporters, very mindful of their sponsors. And that's a tension that is not a comfortable position for a lot of journalists. But I think, unfortunately and fortunately, because some of them are going to rise to be incredible entrepreneurs, I think that you guys at FIU, Cal State, you guys have to embed media entrepreneurship into the very fabric of your program. It's no longer about writing and you're producing. You've got to really help them understand that, or forget it. You're going to continue to have journalists that are very frustrated. So that's a trend that you're going to see continuing to grow. And I think journalists are being asked to do so much today. It's ungodly, really, to think that a journalist today has to do all the things that they do. That is producing tension in families. I'm sure it's impacting, financially, divorce rates. It was always hard to be a print reporter and have to be on call. I cannot imagine having to be a print reporter, have to produce video, you know, and be aware of all the financial stuff. I mean, it's a time of a lot of pressure for journalists. Anyways.
Thank you. Well, I really kind of want to hear what you guys have to say on the questions that you have, but I would put a positive. You guys talked about many of the takeaways from me for the research. I'll finish off with two positive things that I saw coming from the research. One is 54%, almost 54% of respondents said that they would start or live off of their blogs and websites if they had the chance to. So that's entrepreneurial spirit, and the fact that they're optimistic and looking forward to the future came across. That was a very positive thing. The other thing is 58% saw that the rise of social media had a positive impact on the media, which is a really putting a positive. Maybe 5 years ago it wouldn't be the case, but right now people are putting a positive spin on the fact that we do have more opportunities to gather and to present the news. So I would finish with those two.
Of course.
I want to say something before we run out of time. So I think I've heard that there's interest in doing this again, and I don't want to miss the opportunity of asking you to please participate next time. We really tried to keep this to 5 minutes because we wanted to make sure that we increase participation. So we didn't ask all the questions that we wanted to ask because we thought they're only going to give us 5 minutes. And taking the time to answer the open item and really being thoughtful gave us really a great insight. So I hope to see more participation from you because it's very valuable information. You play an important, vital role in our community. We want to know what your challenges are so we can support you.
I want to add something. We also did a survey, I think it'll be released tomorrow or later this week, of Latino bloggers. So it'd be interesting to see if we do some comparison, cross-reference. We did that one with FSU, Florida State University. But I thinking is that one of the most important things that we're doing here is that we're going to have a way of measuring year to year some of these things. So it's going to be very interesting to ask some of these questions. We could probably ask a couple additional questions now that everybody's seeing the benefit of it. But one of the things that I think is really important is that all of you understand that if you guys, Uwe was talking about being hyper-local is really helpful for a lot of you. I would also say to be very focused. If you're going to launch your own blog or something, some platform, be very specific because there is a strong interest in people who create content that is very specific to a niche. For example, you know, it would probably be more attractive to a high-end vehicle company if all you write about are Ferraris. I'm just giving an example. Than if you're just a generalist writing about all the cars. There's pros and cons to it because nowadays content marketing has made it possible for you to actually make a living out of being a very specific media type of company. That was not something that was possible as much before unless you were a major magazine. So anyways.
And to add to that, it's been mentioned a couple of times, and you mentioned before the separation of church and state, and part of what NHJ also works with, and really newsrooms, is understanding that our product is our story. So we jealously protect the integrity, credibility of the content that we produce. With that said, of course, more and more the lines are being erased between what traditionally was marketing and advertising, and to a certain degree also journalism. But it's those filters and having that understanding of the differences between the different types of content is what's going to make you effective, and it's also going to help protect the credibility and integrity of the content that you're producing as a journalist. As a former, head of a news department and news director, I build bridges with our marketing and with our sales team, understanding the importance of nurturing those relationships, because without, this is a business. Without revenue coming in, I cannot sustain the news hours that I had at the time, certainly grow the content that we were producing. But by that team understanding what we do, and there are absolutely certain lines in the sand you can't cross, but also myself, and in this role as president of NHJ and understanding the goals of our sponsors and other non-media sponsors, then I could say to them, well, here's how we could work together and work together towards mutual goals that will not only benefit each other, but benefit the community that we're trying to best serve. We shouldn't be ashamed about that. We need to just be transparent about it and understand that your readers, your listeners, your viewers are very sophisticated and understand the difference between an infomercial and a true journalist story and what's marketing and advertising. All you need to do is be crystal clear with them, and they'll respect you for it.
We have a question here. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the friends that I have left journalism because A, there's no money, B, because some people perceive them as too old, okay? Because it is cheaper for a news director to hire 3 people, okay, with the salary that you have. And also, I work in both coasts. I used to work at Telemundo in Los Angeles as an anchor, and I work here in Miami. And there's like these differences, and I was wondering, what is it that you guys aren't you guys surprised about the fact that people are almost close between optimistic and less optimistic about where we're going? I mean, like every time I interview this, the first thing is like, do you have a blog? Do you have can you shoot, edit, and write and clean it back? And yes, I can clean it back.
So actually, Saul, I'm actually very curious. In this room, by a show of hands, how many are journalists and how many are bloggers? First, journalists? Both. No, and that was my next question. And how many of you do both? So, which is less. Okay, that's actually very interesting. You guys want to take on Saul's question?
Yeah. I guess, what we did is that what that graph shows is that shows the overall trend. And so what we did with the analyses is we dug into it. We wanted to identify who was happiest, or who was the most optimistic and who was the most pessimistic. And along those lines, what we found is that those were, for example, producing material that was bilingual. Those are producing content in English, for example, but it was Hispanic oriented, that they were the happiest. In terms of going back to the issue of it is a changed world. I think there's no doubt about that. And what we saw, though, when you look at the comments, is we saw that people were realizing that they're going to have to embrace the change. There's a reason, for example, that those who are producing in Spanish content, that they saw that their industry was still on the decline, that they wanted those skills to be able to build their own platforms. So I guess that what we're seeing here is that some of the journalists are still nervous, but what they're doing is they're looking at the skills that they need to be less nervous, but to have control over their own futures. The idea to be entrepreneurial. Last but not least, I want to mention about the idea of age. And the best thing about digital media is nobody has any idea how old you are. I mean, nobody ever looks up at a blog or a web page and says, "Oh, this is a person who's 47 or 44 or 50 or 60." And I think that's the great opportunity that the web gives us. It allows people to have a voice fairly inexpensively, and really to be able to do so with at least a limited skill set, if you can do the specific things that you need. But again, I think that moving forward, if you want optimism, you're going to have to be prepared to embrace that digital future.
I want to say I want to say something else. Those that have left that career and moved to somewhere else probably didn't respond, right? So we have to remember that this reflects the sample. And in the comments, the age did come up, and so what Dean says makes me think, for Fullerton, maybe we do need to reach out to older journalists that may need more training in social media, because it is an issue. There's more challenge as we said, for whatever reason, the sample showed that those working in Spanish media wanted more training in social media, and perhaps there's an age indication there as well.
One second. So well, just to put a button to that, you mentioned, and I know Sal and for many years, and while maybe it did help, las velitas y que rezaron por ti, the success that you've had is based on what you've put into it, and so, as it's mentioned before, you can change is constant. You can't do anything about change. Change is going to happen whether you like it or not. You have to make one decision. You're either going to lead change, or change is going to lead you. So it's very important that everybody understand that you need to be amiable. You need to be the constant student. You need to continue to craft your skills to remain competitive in an industry that is continuously evolving. So I think before, and I think if we would have done this study 5 years ago, it'd be much more pessimistic than it is now. But people are now much more acclimated to being multitasking, and that they understand the value of being multifaceted. And 5 years from now, I suspect it'll be even more positive. So I think that everybody needs to embrace change and understand how to lead it, and know that what you're doing right now might not be what you're going to be doing 5 years from now, based on your interest and based on the continuing changes of the industry.
We have a question right here to the left. 1 second, hold on. Let me pick who's going to speak so we don't get confused. We'll start here and then we'll go back here. Go ahead.
Blogging and trying to do all that other stuff, but in terms of traditional journalism as we see it, being Latinos who want to tell Latino stories, but we see outlets like NBC, Latino and CNN, Latino goes to Trump. How do we have optimism in that arena? Or is it debunked?
I think there is a lot of room for that. If you look at the Latino population, especially, regardless of age group, but let's say from 34 to 18, if you look at that population, they are watching videos, they are using the web, they are using social media much more than Anglos and any other group in the US. So I think that's reason for optimism by itself. Latinos by far use social media, and especially videos and multimedia, much more than other groups, which I think bring back that issue. And they are doing that in both languages, Spanish and English. So I think that alone is reason for us to be optimistic and to invest in that kind of training that goes, into multimedia or video editing or posting and using social media to the full extent. But I think the audience is ready, the audience is consuming, the audience wants that content, and we can provide that content. We were trained, whatever we did and whatever we do, we were trained to provide that content. So I think we are the best people in the best place to respond to that change.
Just quickly, and then we'll get to the question that was asked. I'm on Fasus Latino, I'm actually growing my operation. I'm taking it to, streaming programming, partnering with my affiliates, and I can't say much of what I'm doing, but you might see more of our product on television. So I'm actually doubling down my commitment to the Latino community. So I feel it's not, reflective of other operations, but there's still a lot of hope. And, I'm always looking for, good journalists. So after the panel, come see me. Who was?
I think, by the way, just want to add something. There's always, in business, these are two businesses, okay? Yes, there were media platforms, but NBC Latino and CNN are businesses. There are strategic decisions that companies make at a high level that could be abysmal failures if they're not executed properly. And there may be some things that don't appear to us on the front end that they're executed improperly, but I'm just saying that there's probably more to it than just that they folded. I think the fact is that NBC itself, from what I've heard, is that they're themselves going to change some things. Their approach is going to be different. So sometimes a strategic decision may not be necessarily that there was a bad decision. It's just that they think might be a better way, that they're going to approach it, or a different way that they're going to compete with Fox and with other players. So don't think that means it's bad. I do think that the toughest part here is that I know that if I am in J school today, I know for a fact that I better freaking not just know how to edit video, write stories, the whole thing. And thank God kids nowadays, they're being brought up from early school. The biggest headline for me is, you better freaking know something about how the business works of media. It's just like, I'm a passionate, okay, I'm a nobody. My real dream is to be a filmmaker. I'm being very honest with you. See, that's my real motive. Real motive, I want to be a filmmaker. A filmmaker. I want to be producing and directing films. That's my biggest dream. But they say in Hollywood, a lot of people get caught up in the whole part of the show, and they forget that there's what? Business. So the real people that are really successful, the Steven Spielbergs, all those top people, they're really good at show, business. And it's sort of like news, business. That's the part that is challenging, I think, but at the same time will create all these great opportunities.
Okay, we got the question that was asked. What was it?
Okay, yeah. Quick question. I am graduating in my master's at USC at Annenberg in journalism, and I'm struggling in between, going the route of sticking with Univision, sticking with Telemundo, or trying to jump into, the English markets. The issue that I, tend to talk about specifically in my gender and media classes is the hypersexualization of Latinas in news specifically, and how is it that we can and that creates a certain image, of what we have to offer in the specific news industry. How is it that we, moving forward, know that we have to transfer Latino faces into English media? How is it that we can change that stereotype and be able to still be credible and say we have more to offer than just the Latino vote?
Well, the quick answer is you got to get into the game. So whether you decide to go Spanish language route or English language route, it's about having those same conversations within the editorial table at that news organization. That's where it begins, because diversity can't just be. Research tells us that Latinos want to be included and reflected in the content that's being produced, regardless of the platform. So it's not just about, in your case, about just getting people who look like Latinos in front of the camera. Exactly, but it's also having Latinos behind the scenes that are shaping the content that's being produced, not just to assign it to the Latino, but to assign it to as a story in that newscast. So how we break the stereotypes of what Latinos are concerned about is by getting involved. I know when I work for ESPN, when I walk into a room, all of a sudden I'm the soccer expert. I must be the soccer expert because I'm the only Latino in the room. And I said, well, I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up wanting to be, my dream is to be shortstop for the New York Yankees. But another player named Derek Jeter, maybe you heard of him, took that place. But it's important to break those stereotypes. It's about educating, and it's about knocking some of those biases and some of that ignorance that exists because of how you look to those people. And some of it is really, and I'm a half glass full person. Some of it is just ignorance. They're not exposed to us. And so we need to understand that we're not just representing ourselves, but a larger group. And what I tell them all the time, I said, immigration is very important. It is important not just to Latinos, but really it's part of the political conversations across the board, both locally and nationally. But Latinos, if you look at the national election in 2012, what over-indexed for Latinos was what over-indexes for everybody: the economy, unemployment, healthcare, education. So it's just that it's from our voices and our focus, that's where it becomes unique as you continue to get hyper, local. So, my advice is, whether it's Telemundo, and there are certain stereotypes Telemundo and Univision feed to the whole media landscape. So whether you choose Telemundo or Univision, or you choose English language, a dominant language, it's about conversations, it's about being fearless and saying, let's talk about this story, and let me tell you why. Kill them with facts. Let me tell you why this is important.
Okay, we have 10 minutes. We're going to try this speed dating style. So I'm going to ask the panelists to get your responses short, so we can get as many questions in as possible. So who has a question? Aquí atrás. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, hi. I can say I'm an example of survey. I graduated from 2 years ago. I am an HDA member, and I have a website. I just my own videos. I just went to Colombia. I found my niche with sports. I'm trying to get into it. Spanish, I speak it. Then come to college, writing. So I understand. I wish I would have done that when I was in school, because when you get out of school, then okay, get a job. But then it's reality. It's hard to get a job. So I'm in the community on English, maybe Spanish. But in Spanish, it's great, but you can't write. What I can have. So I read, I do everything. I have my website. So now I just did a video about baseball style. But when I present it to, for example, I was with Fox Sports. Oh, it's great, but since we didn't tell you, we can't show it. So how do I make money with it? Or how? Like, I'm doing it because I love what I do, and I want to show people what I can bring to the table. But it's hard because I edit, I do a video, I go to the camera, I do the interview, then where does the entrepreneurship part come in? How do I, because I'm already my own boss, but how do I get the money? Or how do I present it to everyone? And it's only free, but we didn't really do it. Like ESPN, oh, it's great, but we didn't really do it. Or we can't show that as copyright or whatever the case may be. So in that part, I'm the example, but then it's like, not what?
Who wants to take that one?
Let me just say that this is kind of what Hispanicize is about. All of the industries of journalism, blogging, marketing, film, music, they're all converging, guys. They've all converged, by the way. They're not converging. They've converged. Whether you know it or not, they've converged. I would just tell you, you know what? Pay attention to the content that you're going to see at this event. There's going to be a lot of these types of entrepreneur-type questions that relate to you as a journalist, relate to you as an individual, and professionally, you'll be able to understand a broader scope of the things that are making us converge, collide, collaborate, sometimes conflict, right? And so that's part of what you're going to get from Hispanicize. And just check out the schedule. I think you'll get a lot of your questions answered by the time that we're done in the next 4 days.
Okay, questions? Acá atrás, go ahead.
Quick question for the panelists and also Mr. Cortez. I often get asked by young Latino journalists like what they should do, or if you should consider a career in journalism. What is one thing, with an emphasis on brevity, what is the one thing that you would say to a young Latino journalist, or perhaps just someone in college who's considering the field of journalism, about whether to do this or not?
One of the things that I think I would recommend the most is the quality. I think Hugo was talking about that earlier, the integrity of your work and the quality of the work. One of the things that we emphasize at the school is that you can't throw away the traditional values of journalism. As you embrace the new and you embrace multimedia and digital, you have to think about the ethics, you have to think about the legal issues, you have to think about the quality of the work and the integrity, your integrity as a journalist. And I think that's the thing we recommend the most is the excellence. doing everything to be the best and to be excellent in what you do in terms of obeying the traditional values of journalism, embracing the new by, but not forgetting about the old and the traditional values.
We have 5 minutes.
I would also say be an expert in something. You don't need to major in journalism to become a journalist. I think it's valuable to have journalists that have a degree in economics, a law degree, a degree in any form in health. So not history. If you are the expert in something, then again, it's points of differentiation in that newsroom, and it makes you more competitive. So if you look at news content, it's driven by certain categories. If you're an expert in one of those categories, you're indispensable.
This is the advice I gave yesterday to our students that are here. Andres, thank you. We had a great conversation. Yes, all the panelists are correct. You know what? Being a good journalist, having good content, producing good content. The other thing, though, is being entrepreneurial and identifying a niche. What's an open niche? What is it that's out there that people have interest in, which is technically news, that nobody is doing? So, for example, Andres, I hope I don't spoil it, but we were talking about one of the fastest growing classes in middle classes in the world is in Latin America. Mexico and Brazil, they're going to become tourists. So the idea of perhaps Spanish language travel blogs, tourism blogs. So the idea though was to identify a niche that nobody else is filling at this point in time and then target your efforts there.
We have 4 minutes, but quickly, I say journalism is an amazing field. I've been fortunate. I've just promoted to vice president. I travel often, and to your point, creating a niche was where I saw an opportunity among a big company to cater to Latinos, where there wasn't one. And I've been able to push that forward heavily in my position, and I'm privileged. I feel very privileged every day to do what I do. One last question, 4 minutes. Acá atrás, go ahead.
How do you strike a balance between the entrepreneurial side of business and the journalism side? It's overwhelming with the entrepreneurial side because there's sales, bookkeeping, marketing, branding, sales, collecting sales. But yet, on the other hand, you have all the content, writing stories, taking photographs, posting all that content. How do you keep from becoming overwhelmed and finding balance?
Well, I would say that you can't be everything. In my case, I have a big help from my wife, who's my partner for real in every way. And she's not in the audience, so I said this for real. No, but I would say that it's, look, I suck at math. So I try not to deal with, it's ironic because I'm the lead salesperson here, right, for all these sponsors. But don't ask me to look at a spreadsheet or whatever, because I really massively struggle, and I just like to connect to ideas and words and concepts. So just know what your strength is, and everything else, try to delegate it to somebody else. If you're not good at accounting, don't freaking try to be an accountant, okay? Focus, because you're gonna waste a lot of energy in things that depress you about being a media entrepreneur. And if you really are bad at it, you might even screw up your whole business. So just don't work with cheap people either. Don't take the shortcuts. It's going to be hard. By the way, this is brutal. Being a media entrepreneur, we're going to talk about that on Thursday. Being a media entrepreneur is brutal work. And I would hope that on Thursday, those of you that are coming to that will actually know if you want to even do that part or not. Because that's one of the things we're going to try to do, is try to scare the crap out of you from doing it before we tell you how to do it.
Well, I'm sure we have a lot of questions, pero the time has come. It's 10:50 time. We got to end this panel. I want to thank the panelists for taking the time to conduct the survey. I think based on the amount of questions we've had, you see the interest in how important the survey is, and I'm actually interested to see the findings next